Hello and welcome back, adventurers. This is Captain TTRPG, and today we're talking about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Welcome back, adventurers. Today we are going to finish our discussion about the combat conditions in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. For those of you who haven't watched the first half, I suggest you watch that first. Not that this will be very confusing without it, but it had a better intro to it than this one's going to have. Also, for those who watched it, you'll realize, apparently, Captain TTRPG doesn't know how to count, so we have more than half of them remaining. Oh well, let's go ahead and dive right in here with the next one alphabetically, which is immobilized, and you are stuck in place. That's right, you cannot use any action with the move trait on it, which means, of course, striding, stepping, anything like that, that's right out, but even anything that you would have that maybe includes moving, any special actions you have, beyond that, you can't even be forcibly moved unless that whatever's happening to you, whatever spell or push or whatever, that has to also beat the DC of whatever effect may be immobilized in the first place. Which means when you're immobilized, you are stuck. Now, you can still escape sometimes, because usually you're immobilized as part of something. If it's part of a spell, you may not have a great way to get out of that. And not being able to move is a problem. You can still take other actions as long as they're not involving moving. So if you're a spellcaster or a ranged combatant, you might still be okay. But for all you melee fighters out there, you don't want this. Invisible. You can't be seen. Shock face. The detection rules, they're not the easiest. I know some of the stuff came up before. Again, I'm just going to say to go through all of the rules around detection. I'll have a link in the description that'll help you point to a video where he does an amazing job getting through all that for you. But this is to say that when you're invisible, you are undetected by other creatures, so they can't directly target you in any way unless they can find you with some sense other than sight. So if they have like tremor sense or something like that, they might still be able to locate you. Creatures using sight, however, they can try to seek you, and if they beat your stealth DC, then you become hidden instead of invisible, which is still hard for them to target you, right? They still can't directly target you. They have to choose the square you're in and try to shoot there. Because you're invisible, that means other creatures are off guard to you, which is fantastic for you. So do take advantage of that, and they're going to have a heck of a time trying to hit you with anything. This is a very powerful buff to have. If you can somehow keep invisibility on yourself and take actions, you're going to be a huge problem for the enemy. Observed. Again, this is part of the whole detection rules. Basically, observed is just the default. So it's almost like a non-condition. It's you're there. Congratulations. Not much to say about that. Off guard. This comes up all the time. You heard it in the last video. You've already heard it in this video. Off guard is one of the most common, if not the most common condition in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So many features either set this up or take advantage of it that it's going to come up in your games. So what does it mean? If a creature is off guard, it has a -2 circumstance penalty to its AC, which means it'll stack with status penalties, like the frightened condition, to its AC. Keep that in mind. The type of penalty matters because it stacks with status penalties. That's like the big deal with it, and it's so easy to trigger this. In fact, the simplest way is just to flank with an ally. So if you're on either sides of an enemy within melee range, you're both flanking it, it's off guard to both of you, and that -2 to AC, that means a 10% increase to your hit chance and or crit chance, depending on how numbers all line up. That's a big deal. This is strong. It's always strong when somebody's AC is lower. It's not one of the strongest conditions in the game by any means. One, because it's usually so easy to get in or out of, and two, because it only affects your AC. It's not like frightened where it's affecting everything. Paralyzed. Now here's something scary. You can't move, but in a different way than immobilized. You're off guard, which we talked about. You can't take actions except for recall knowledge. So you're not doing anything. There are some mental actions, though, that your GM can allow you to use. Remember that even if you can recall knowledge, you likely won't be able to share that with anybody unless you have telepathy, and your GM allows that, because you can't talk. Your senses still do work, however. So other than not being able to give out information, you're still taking in all the information around you. It's a very strong condition. As a player, you want to avoid this at all cost, and you want to inflict this if at all possible. This essentially takes somebody out of combat for as long as it lasts. Persistent damage. This is kind of a thing all on its own, so I'm just going to give you a light touch. I'm also going to have a link about persistent damage in the description of this video because I think it's so important. Basically, you're going to take damage at the end of every one of your turns, and after you take damage, you get to make a save to see if it goes away. But this is a flat check, and it's not going to happen all that often. It's only a 30% chance to get rid of it at the end of every turn. Petrified. You are stone. You have become stone. You don't just look like stone. You're not just solid like stone. You are stone. You get a hardness and an AC for being an object. And if you are broken, you die. You can't age, which is great. But this is about as bad as it gets other than just being dead. This can at least be reversed. But if you can cause this in play, absolutely cause this to an enemy because you have removed it. For all intents and purposes, it is dead unless the petrification just ends on its own somehow. If you get petrified, just pray your allies have some way to get rid of it. Prone. You fall down. You're off guard. We see that a lot. And you get a -2 circumstance penalty to your attack roll, so you can still swing while you're on the ground, but you're not going to be as good at it. You can't move unless it's the crawl move action, or you can stand up. Keep in mind, both of these take an action, so standing up is one of your 3 actions. Be careful, because both can trigger reactive strikes. Again, not every creature has reactive strikes, but you can trigger them this way, including standing up. One advantage is that you can take cover and gain greater cover against ranged attacks while you're prone. So there are advantages, and sometimes you might strategically dive on the ground. In fact, there are some classes that have feats that give you this condition on purpose to do things like this. Fighters, by the way, should try to inflict this on creatures whenever possible because they get that guaranteed reactive strike on stand-up. Not upper tier of conditions, but still quite strong, especially if you have somebody with a reactive strike near a creature. Quickened. You gain an extra action at the start of each round. Now hear what I said, at the start of each round. So if you gain this condition during your turn, you don't get the extra action that turn. It has to wait till the start of your next round. Also, usually when you get quickened, there's something specific about how you use that action. So you might be quickened and you can use the action to either stride or strike. That's probably your most common. This is fantastic, but it still sits in kind of a middle ground place. It's not absolutely broken, but it's not weak by any means. It's a nice thing to have, and just keep aware of how you're allowed to use it. Restrained. You are held against your will. You're off guard and immobilized, which of course we talked about both. Thank you, Alphabet, for setting me up well for that one. Also, you can't attack or use anything with the manipulate trait. All you can do is use either the escape or force open actions. This does override the grabbed condition. I mean, restrained does. So restrained is better than grabbed. So you're not grabbed and restrained at the same time. You're just restrained. This is extremely powerful. And the very reason grapple builds are such powerhouses. I mean, already grabbed is great, so you can do that. But a critical success when you grapple somebody is the restrained condition. Having a grappler in the party to restrain creatures can severely increase your chances in fights with just a few enemies. This is particularly crippling against spellcasters because they don't have a great way to get out. They're usually not strong, and they don't have great reflexes or dexterity, so the chance of them escaping is pretty low. Very strong condition. Sickened. You feel physically ill. This always comes with a value, so sickened 1, 2, 3. All of your checks and DCs get a status penalty equal to the level of sickness. So this is, we're talking kind of frightened levels of bad here. You also can't eat or drink anything, including potions or elixirs, which you'd think would help you get out of being sickened. But you can't even do that. The only way to get rid of it without some sort of magical assistance is to take an action to retch. Yeah, you have to vomit this up. And when you retch, it doesn't just go away. You have to make a fortitude save against the DC of the effect just to drop the level of sickness by 1. If you crit succeed on that, you get to drop it by 2 levels, which is great. This is brutal and very challenging to remove, especially compared to something like Frightened. This requires an action tax from the creature just to try to get rid of it, and they might not even succeed. This is honestly, if you've got a choice between this and Frightened, this is an easy call. Take Sickened and cause it to enemies every single time. Slowed. You lose actions. This always comes with a number, 1, 2, 3, whatever. And at the start of your turn, you lose that many actions for the turn. So if you're slowed 2, at the start of your turn, you lose 2 actions. You only have 1 this turn. Ouch. Slowed 3 means you just don't get actions on your turn unless you were somehow quickened, which we just talked about. This doesn't immediately affect you if it happens on your turn, though. So if you're mid-turn and something manages to throw slow on you, doesn't affect you that turn. It's always beginning of turn. Anything that reduces action economy in the game is going to be very, very powerful. This can be crippling if you can put it on enemies, and especially if they're down to maybe 1 action or 0, they're out of the game. Stunned. You are completely senseless. This almost always comes with a value, so 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. But in this case, the value is reduced each time you should gain actions. So beginning of your turn, you're stunned 4, you lose 3 actions, you go down to stunned 1. It really hurts you lost that turn, but at least next time you're only going to lose 1 action. Looking at round 2, you would start with, you lose 1 action, therefore you would start with only 2 actions you can do anything with, but at least you still have those. If you were slowed 2 and stunned 4, it's kind of weird, the interaction, so be careful here. First round, you would be stunned 3 of those. Great, you lost that whole turn, but now you're stunned 1 and slowed 2. Second turn happens, that 1 stun gets rid of 1 action, but you don't lose 2 for the slow. The slowed counts kind of after the stun, and so the most you can lose from that slowed 2 is 2 actions, which means if you started stunned 1 and slowed 2, you would still have 1 action left that turn. Very niche situation, but just putting it out there. Now, stunned could just say stunned for 1 minute or something like that, and that means you lose all of your actions for a minute. Extremely deadly. Stunned is even stronger than slowed in a lot of ways, except for that it can go away on its own. It still ranks as one of the absolute strongest conditions. Stun your enemies always and often. Stupefied. The mind foggy condition. I don't know. This always has a number also, 1, 2, 3. We like our numbers. Your mental checks and DC get a status penalty equal to the number. So this is your will save, but also anything to do with intelligence, wisdom, or charisma. Your spell attack rolls and spell save DC also take this penalty. Finally, if you try to cast a spell while stupefied, you have to beat a flat check. Remember, flat checks don't get bonuses or anything. Equal to 5 plus the value of stupefied. So if you are stupefied 3, you have to beat an 8 with a flat check. This is a shutdown spell against spellcasters. If you've got spellcasters you're dealing with and you can somehow stupefy them, especially if you have a way to do it without them getting a will save against it, this will absolutely change the tides of battle. But again, it's only good against those spellcasters. Possibly harming people's will saves against your own spellcasters. Yes, there's strength there, but really this isn't as good as something like Frightened. Unconscious. This is tied into the whole dying thing, but it doesn't have to be. So a few situations here. You can be knocked unconscious because you were knocked down from dropping below 1 hit point, or you could just be sleeping. Anyway, while you're unconscious, you have a -4 status penalty to your AC, reflex saves, and perception checks, as well as the off-guard condition. So your AC is just through the floor terrible. And you have the blinded condition. Basically, everything is going to hit you. You won't see it coming. It'll mostly be crits. And when you gain the condition, you drop prone, which isn't very surprising. If you were asleep, hopefully you were already prone. Getting out of the condition depends on why you're there in the first place. If knocked out and dying, you wake up when you gain at least 1 hit point back. If you were not dying, but still knocked out with 0 hit points, return to 1 hit point after an amount of time that the GN determines. So you might have to be there for a little while, and this wakes you up. Finally, if you are asleep and at 1 hit point or more, so you're not actually at 0, you're just unconscious because you're sleeping, then you wake up when you either take damage, assuming you don't get knocked out by the damage, sound wakes you up, the GM tells you to wake up, you receive healing from an outside source, not from resting itself, or someone shakes you awake. This doesn't really deserve a rating as it's just part of the game in the activities that occur. I suppose it can render a creature if you can render a creature unconscious, that's great. Though in many cases, dead would just be better, unless you want to get information from them. If you do want to knock a creature out though, this is what non-lethal attacks are for. Undetected. You are hidden and no creature can target you or knows what square you're in. It is known that you exist, however. So your presence is something that creatures are aware of. There's a different condition for that. If you're undetected by a creature, that creature is off guard to you. You can lose this condition if a creature seeks and finds you, or if you take actions that reveal yourself or change your status to hidden or less. This is the second best detection situation to be in and is very strong. So if you can be undetected, be undetected. Undetected enemies are scary. Unnoticed. Let's go ahead and step right up here to the pinnacle of detection situations. This means that creatures don't even know you're in the area. If you are unnoticed, yes, you are undetected, but they can't even go looking for you because they don't even know you're there. Starting combat this way is so very powerful, but not encounter winning on its own. It just sets you up because you can be in the best possible situation. Okay, we are on our last condition. We finally get to the wounded condition. This is the condition you gain when you are dying and come back up from dying. You start the day with no wounded value, but if you become dying at any point, and then you are saved by healing to get back up to at least 1 hit point, and your dying condition ends, you gain the wounded 1 condition. Every time you go back down to start dying again and come back up, it increases. So you go from wounded 1, next time you're knocked down, brought back up, now you're wounded 2, knocked down, come back up, now you're wounded 3. What does it do? Well, when you go from not dying to dying because you took damage, normally you'd start at dying 1. However, you start at dying 1 plus your wounded value. So if you're wounded 2 and you get knocked out from damage, you're not dying 1, you're dying 3. Which means generally, if you're wounded 3, don't get knocked out or you'll go dying 4 and die. Luckily, you can get rid of the wounded condition as long as a creature uses treat wounds on you. Normally, this is an action you take outside of combat and not only heals you, but it does get rid of your wounded condition. You're taking it as a 10-minute kind of rest phase while somebody's treating your wounds with a medicine kit. Though it can be dealt with, this is still just one of the scariest PC conditions. You're not generally seeing this on enemies because usually when we knock enemies out, we just say they die. Depends on your GM. Most tables play like that. For player characters, this is a very scary place to be. This is how players die. In D&D 5e, there's the whole idea of the death yo-yo where you can get knocked out and brought back up over and over and over again because it doesn't matter. In Pathfinder2e, your yo-yo is actually bringing you closer to death every single time. Don't die. And that's it. Finally, all combat conditions are complete. I might do a social conditions video, but I haven't really decided on that yet. There are some really good videos out there about it anyway. Either way, I'm going to go look up the best ways to stun my enemies, and as always, adventure on.